Dr. Simone Gold started America's Frontline Doctors. It has been under grave attack this week for several reasons. One is because they made an impact and they were immediately banned by Google and Facebook and YouTube, just gone. Now they are busy trying to dismantle reputations. I want to introduce you to the founder of the Frontline Doctors, judge her on her character and her ability. I want to give you her resume here. She's a board-certified emergency physician. She graduated from Chicago Medical School before attending Stanford University Law School. She completed her residency in emergency medicine at Stony Brook University Hospital in New York. She worked in Washington, D.C. for the Surgeon General, as well for the chairman of the Labor and Human Resources Committee. She works as an emergency physician on the front lines, whether or not there is a pandemic. Her clinical work serves all Americans from urban, inner city to suburban and the Native American population. Her legal practice focuses on policy issues relating to law and medicine. I found her very credible last night and very passionate, and an American who has a right to be heard. You may leave this disagreeing with her, but what is more important than allowing voices to be heard? Dr. Simone Gold is joining us now. Doctor, how are you?
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Sure. I'm so glad to have you on again. I'd like you to start with where you were last night with hydroxychloroquine and what that drug is, its history, and the things that I didn't know of it being taken off the market just as this was hitting over in France and elsewhere. Can we start there?
Okay, So yes, and with you, I'd like to run your listeners and viewers through all of this. You're one of the first people to get the whole story, so just sit tight. It's going to be good, and I'm going to give you references for everything that I'm saying. And lastly, everything that I'm saying has been documented, and people can look up the references themselves at a website that we just put up quickly called America's Frontline Doctors Summit, with one S between American and Summit, America's Frontline Doctors Summit.com, because they took down my website. So
okay, hang on just a second. Hey, hold on before you start.
Sorry.
I want to also say this. We are going to clip this, but I can guarantee you that this will not be played on social media. It will be banned. It will be destroyed. You will not see this anywhere. I urge you to listen carefully and to take notes. But go ahead, Doctor.
That's a good point. And to join Blaze TV so that you can hear all of this. Okay.
Thank you.
So the controversy is, we're pretending this controversy is about hydroxychloroquine. It's a complete mess. How do we know it's a complete mess? Hydroxychloroquine is an analog or derivative of quinine, which is found in tree barks. It's the most non-controversial of medications there is. We know that George Washington used it in the Revolutionary War, and it's actually credited with why we won in the last battle. He encouraged his troops to take it. So it's been around for centuries, and it's been FDA approved as a modern version called hydroxychloroquine for 65 years. And all of that time, we use it for breastfeeding women, pregnant women, elderly, children, and the immune compromised. The typical use is for decades, for years or decades, because we give it mostly to RA, rheumatoid arthritis patients, and lupus patients who need to be on it really essentially for all of their life, most of their life. So we have extensive experience with it. In addition, in countries that have malaria that's endemic in their countries, they use it all the time. It's one of the most commonly used medications throughout the world. It's on the WHO's list of indispensable essential medications, a list of medicines that should always be available and is essential that any country has. That's its status. If you use it for more than 5 years, you're encouraged to get an annual or I think biannual eye checkup, because you could get a rare condition called retinopathy. However, that's 1% at 5 years. So in terms of a short-term use, there's essentially zero risk. There's a theoretical risk of this little heart thing called QT prolongation, which has to do with how the heart charges itself. it is real, but there's hundreds of medications that do potentially increase the QT interval. It's not risky enough.
And with hydroxychloroquine,
it's not considered risky enough to even screen for the QT prolongation prior to starting.
And it is also only with a combination of another drug, right? It's not caused by hydroxychloroquine. It is caused in a very small number.
Let me just be clear. Hydroxychloroquine can by itself prolong the QT interval, as can hundreds of medications. But the disinformation campaign about that is, first of all, prolonging the QT interval is very common. It might be like saying you get nausea from the medicine. It's very common. And it matters only if it's prolonged a significant enough amount to cause a heart rhythm problem. So what I'm saying is it doesn't get prolonged significantly enough that it's even recommended to check prior to starting routinely. So most people who use this medication prior to COVID were rheumatologists, and it's on the American College of Rheumatology website informational sheet that you don't even have to do a pre-starting EKG before you start the medicine. Many rheumatologists have gone on TV to say that's their practice, that in 30 years, 4,000 patients, they've never even done an EKG prior to starting.
Now, this was over-the-counter. Was it over-the-counter here or in many places around the world and not here?
It was never over-the-counter here, but it's important to understand that wasn't due to a lack of safety. The safety issue is indisputable, and we'll go over exactly why we know that, but it was over-the-counter in much of the world. Now, medications become over-the-counter when there's a consumer demand for it. So in countries that have malaria throughout their region, they want their citizens to have access to malaria-reducing or treating medications such as chloroquine, which is a precursor. So in those countries, it's over-the-counter. And many other countries, Mexico comes to mind, much of Latin America was over-the-counter. We just never had the demand here because we don't have malaria here. The people in our country who use it historically are patients with rheumatoid arthritis and lupus who were already routinely going to doctors. So for them to get it over-the-counter, they're going to see doctors anyway. The average citizen walking into a drugstore wouldn't need it. There's no consumer demand. It would just languish on the shelf. That's the predominant reason it hasn't gone over-the-counter. That's the answer. But it was over-the-counter in countries like France, for example.
Okay, and then it came off of the over-the-counter list in France and other countries in January of this year. Tell me about that.
Yes, so it's fun to build up to that and explain that later, but we can go right into that right now. So when President Trump, I knew about this drug probably working for COVID-19, at least as far back as February, because it was very promising in the very early trials in China and early trials in Marseille, France. It was so promising, in fact, that on February 19th, the country of China actually said that it should be a treatment for any future COVID-19 outbreak. I was actually very stunned to discover that in my research. So I had my eye on it, and then all of a sudden, and I got myself hands on it. I just figured every intelligent physician would do that, knowing that there's a problem coming, and I justified it because as an emergency physician, I knew I was considered an essential worker, and I needed to make sure I had it. I didn't start it or anything. I just kind of waited. Many doctors did that, by the way. There's many polls of physicians, and something like a third of doctors took some, obtained some. And the American Medical Association in late March, I think, issued a statement asking doctors not to hoard the medication. That's how common it was. So the way other people were hoarding toilet paper, doctors were hoarding hydroxychloroquine. Then Donald Trump said that he thought it might possibly be a good medication. And the next day, the media I don't know a better expression, Glenn, but they vomited all over hydroxychloroquine. And I was really shocked. I mean, this is a totally non-controversial medication. It was really bizarre. So I felt like everyone else thought, well, the media doesn't like Donald Trump. He said it was good, so they say it's bad, right? It fell into Orange Man bad category. And I think I thought that for 6 to 8 weeks. And then this remdesivir trial came out, and I looked at that. As a doctor, I'm used to using 20 different medicines to treat a condition. So I'm happy to have lots of options. I had nothing against remdesivir. And in fact, I invested a little bit of money, small, we're talking like a couple $1,000s in Gilead because I thought, it might be good. So the trial comes out, and honestly, it wasn't that great. It wasn't bad, but it wasn't great. It cut the hospital stay by about 3 days, but it didn't influence mortality. It didn't reduce mortality. And it certainly wasn't a fabulous drug. But the media held, there was some media coverage like how fabulous it was. And at that moment, I thought that was really weird, because it's one thing to hate hydroxychloroquine because the president said it, but it was another thing to give a free pass to another medicine that didn't seem that great. I thought that was really weird. So I started looking into it. And let me tell you what I discovered was absolutely shocking. So it was over the
Okay,
counter.
wait. Let me take before you get into this, let me take a 1-minute break and then tell us what you found, because I agree with you. It is shocking, and you're not going to hear this really anyplace else. And it will, I mean, I'm doing this now on public airwaves because that is the biggest platform that I have that I know her voice will be heard. You need to do your own homework. You need to decide for yourself. But since when in America do we ban other people's opinions because they say something different than what the government says? This is the First Amendment. So we're with Dr. Gold now, and she started doing her own homework. She couldn't figure out why the media was against hydroxychloroquine, and she assumed, as I did, that it's because Orange Man bad. Donald Trump liked it, and so it must be bad. What did you find, however, when that answer didn't start to fit everything that was going on?
Again, everything is referenced. I'm going to give all those references to your listeners. I found out that the drug was moved from over-the-counter status in France, where you can just walk in and buy it for yourself, to, quote, list 2 poisonous substance, which requires a prescription. This was done very quietly, if no announcement. You can find this. Again, you'll find it on my website. And this was shocking, and this really didn't make the news or anything. Now, you have to ask yourself, why did France remove hydroxychloroquine off its shelves, especially when they knew that it was likely to work? And when I say likely to work, I say that because this COVID-19 virus is not all that novel, despite the name that it's been given. It is 78% similar to SARS-CoV-1. This COVID-19 is an acronym really for SARS-CoV-2, but there was a SARS-CoV-1. And in 2005, Virology, which is the official publication of the National Institute of Health, which was directed by Anthony Fauci at the time, published an article stating that it found that chloroquine worked prophylactically and in early treatment for SARS-CoV-1. So there was, even if you felt it hadn't been proven to work for COVID-19 yet, you certainly thought of it as a contender. That's a really weird time for France to pull hydroxychloroquine off its shelf. They did that on January 13th.
They did that the January 13th. So this is long before really anybody is talking about, closing down our economies or anything else. It's right as the world is starting to understand that something is happening in China.
This was 2.5 weeks, I think, before Donald Trump shut the planes right down in a move that was called racist. This was very, very early. I mean, really early. This was like just a couple of weeks. We just sort of were hearing about this from China. It wasn't all over the news in America. It was on the news a little bit. This was unbelievably early. I could not believe when I discovered this.
So why did they pull it off?
Well, I like to say that if you're in a battle with somebody, an economic battle, and you've knocked out the best early contender, who would benefit? You would have the contenders that remain. If you took out Mike Tyson, who would benefit, right? You got to wonder who would benefit. It would be other treatments.